This is Fountain
Every
Street
week I find
Church.
it hard to find the best ones, but somehow, like I said, you'll hear what I'm trying to say even when the words
Here,
are...
we strive to free the mind, grow the soul, and change the world. Here, there is freedom to doubt and freedom to believe. Here, you can find a house of prayer for all people.
The swallow up Jonah.
Welcome to Fountain Street Church. Join us on the journey.
We are so blessed, musically, personally. Granted gifts we cannot even number. So many, in fact, that in reading that list earlier, my fingers missed an entire page of organizations. They were stuck together, and now I have to tell them to you. And I'm sorry, but you need to know that we also gave money to the Fair Housing Center, to Family Promise, which you saw in yesterday's Grand Rapids Press, and with which we're working, to Oxfam, to the Albert Schweitzer Hospital in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, to the Heartside Ministries and Heartline Ministries, to Planned Parenthood, to In the Image, which provides free clothing in this town, to International Aid. I am so sorry not to have pulled those pages apart when I had them. I thought I'd done everything. Goodness gracious. Holidays notwithstanding, I have to admit that it was hard to feel merry this week. As you know, the first week of snow and cold is no help to those of us who deal with seasonal affective disorder. My wife bought me one of those lights, and I have it on my desk in the office, and since my office has no window, it is a welcome addition. But I think I also had good reason to feel a little less merry than I really wanted to. Especially yesterday, it seems that political dogmatism is not only on display, but forever established in Washington. And the worse things get for people, the worse they all seem to behave. Apparently, the same leaders who tell us that we should reduce the national debt also believe that if you make more than $1 million, that you don't have any extra you could pitch in, because after all, taxes are as wicked as the debt. And I'm still trying to figure out how we're going to get to both of those. I forgot the unemployed. That's right. They're not making any money, and when their benefits wear out, we can harvest a little money there, because, as we know, and so famously said in another book of which I'm quite fond, are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? Apparently, those who don't make money had best get out of the way for those who do. Our Advent tradition makes this the Sunday of hope, and as I told you, it's a little difficult to feel as hopeful as I want this week. I need your help. I need your help to do that today. And that's why I say, as I do every week, may these words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, O thou who art my rock and my Redeemer. On Wednesday, my spouse and I went over to East Congregational Church. It was December 1st. We were there to be in the congregation for the observance of World AIDS Day, something I've done most every year with a few exceptions in the last 20 years. Now, ironically, I think AIDS is a good place to start talking about hope. I want to say that because I arrived and lo and behold, there was someone I see in the gym every week, and he's walking down the hall. And it later turns out he's conducting the service. It later turns out that he's been living with HIV for 25 years. I felt a moment of hope there. I looked around and I saw that a former fountain clubber, who's now a graduate from college, is dancing. And so I get to watch her dance up there on the platform. That gave me a little bit of hope, because, when you send high schoolers out into the world, it's a little uncertain where they're going to land. And she had landed not only on both feet, but with cartwheels. I felt a little bit of hope because I saw other members of this community there in some capacity, and those who are from other communities, not ours, but on this moment we could feel like we had common cause, that we had either lost someone or known someone or cared about those who were dealing with HIV/AIDS. And then I began to remember the time that I was ministering to those with HIV/AIDS in earnest. That was almost 20 years ago, and it was back in Austin, Texas, a city which I love every year more in January not so much in July. But I remember those brief 4 years because that was the time when I encountered those who were still dying of AIDS as a clergyman, and I conducted some memorial services. I remember knowing D.W. and Alan and Axel and Woody, people I knew, the loved ones of people I knew. These are the ones I buried. Those who died back in the early 90s were legion. Some of us remember that it was a plague. We never knew where it would come next, and if it wasn't going to strike us personally, we knew that it was coming closer every day to people we knew and loved. And the names, we read the names on Wednesday night, not all of us, the names of those who died in Kent County that are in the Quilt Project, the AIDS Quilt Project. There were maybe 30 or 40 names, but almost all of them were uttered by someone who himself or herself had lost someone or was dealing with HIV/AIDS, and sometimes they'd utter another name of someone who was their partner, and they would weep afresh. And I asked myself, where does hope come from in times like those that I served, in times like these, those who are still living with it and those who are still reeling from it? I want to leave that thought with you for a moment. Where does hope come from? I want you to think about where it comes from, because now I'm going to change gears. Before I arrived, your interim minister was a woman of substance, as I'd like to call it, Judith Walker Riggs. She occupied a room in every sense of the word. And I've known her for some time, and I visited with her when she served a congregation in London, England. I first saw her, though, in 1987 when she preached a sermon at the Convention of the Unitarian Universalists. And she had that big, pronounced voice, and I fell in love with that voice as I listened to her. And I remember the sermon, at least the title to this day. It was called Without Feathers. Those of you who keep your Woody Allen books at home know that that's a title of one of his early collections of essays, probably our best comedian of despair in the modern times would be Woody Allen. As I remember, he said something like, I wouldn't mind dying so much as long as I didn't have to be there when it happened. I think we all have a touch of that going in ourselves. But where did that title come from? Well, it comes from a poem by Emily Dickinson. You can see part of it on the top of your order of worship. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. It goes on for 2 more verses, but that first verse is so rich I've never forgotten it. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. That image is what I want you to ponder today. That hope perches in the soul. Did you remember, that used to be, when I was a kid at least, a lot more people kept birds at home. Often it was a maiden aunt or one of those eccentric Auntie Mame types. And you go into their house, you have a little chirping going on, and maybe there'd be a little budgie or a parakeet. My great aunt had parakeets, and periodically she would open the little cage and one would come to the edge, and if you held up your finger just right, it would kind of step onto your finger tentatively. And if you stood very still, it would stay there, and it might even whistle or sing a note or two. Now, birds are a chore to take care of. The cage, there's the paper, and they tend to fling seeds all over the place. They're not a convenient pet. And then there's the cage thing. But they are so interesting as creatures because they fly, because they sing, and some of them can imitate the human voice, and they're so colorful.